On behalf of the World Rowing Competitive Commission, I have the pleasure to introduce you the two speakers of the first sessions of the World Rowing 2020 Virtual Coach Conference. Guin Batten, who will present how to do the beach sprint and coastal beach sprint and training, and Thomas Losnegård from Norway, who will present lessons and comprehension of the cross-country skiing, Prologue Ski with quarterfinal, semi-final, and final within a short period of time, and how to maintain metabolic level. Let me give you a short biography of our two speakers. Guin Batten from United Kingdom, chair of the Rowing for All Commission and member of the World Rowing Council, a director of Henley Royal Regatta, and chair of the Women's 8 Head of the River race. In 2000, at the Sydney Olympic Games, Guin made history by being part of the crew that won Britain's first ever female rowing medal at the Olympic Games. This was the highlight of an international career that spanned 9 years, 2 Olympic Games, and 6 World Rowing Championships. More recently in coast rowing, Guin has won 2 World Championship titles. Guin has a handful of world records, including the fastest solo rowing crossing of the English Channel, 3 hours 14 minutes, and the fastest USA to UK land record of 49 days. Our second speaker is Dr. Thomas Losnegård. He is working at the Norwegian School of Sports Science as associate professor and at the Norwegian Olympic Center as head of the endurance department. He conducted a PhD in 2013 into the field of physical determinants of elite cross-country skiing. His research field is applied physiology, biomechanics, and performance analysis. Particularly into the elite cross-country skiing, he is teaching students into exercise science and practical endurance training and skiing. I would like to thank Guin and Thomas for their contribution to the World Rowing 2020 Virtual Coach Conference. I would like also to remind you all that today's speakers will also take part in a live question and answer session on Saturday, 5th December. Please send your question to Chair of the Commission, Rosie McLeather, that you can find her email in the World Rowing website, or put them in the Zoom chat at the time of the live session, and we will try to get as many answered as possible. Thank you to all of you for joining the conference.
Hello, it's a real honour to talk to you today as part of the World Rowing Coaches Conference. I'm going to talk to you about a really exciting part of the sport, coastal rowing. The discipline itself was created in the late 90s by the French, and it's gone from strength to strength. There's 2 disciplines primarily that exist in the sport at a competition level, and that is endurance, which is racing around a series of buoys between 4 and 6 kilometers, and there is a world championships ready for that. And also the beach sprint version, and the beach sprint version is relatively new, started in the 2015 was the first time it was held officially as part of the Mediterranean Beach Games. So it's evolved slowly out of the Beach Games era. And it's beach sprint I'm going to talk to you about today. So let's head down before we get going. Let's head down and look at a really great video that's on the YouTube website that introduces you to beach sprint. So to do that, I've got to share my screen. and let's head to that. I'm going to show my whole screen, my whole desktop. So you're going to be able to see everything on my computer, but I think there's a much better way of doing what we need to do. So let's get to the video, and I'll show you the first couple of minutes.
There's running on land, jumping in the boat, going around, some boys coming in, sprinting.
It's a lot more difficult than I imagined. You can practice as much as you want, but if you get hit by a wave coming in or even going out, or if the conditions completely change, you get blown off the buoy. The most difficult part is finding the right route to go. It's the buoy turns and the slaloming that's so different to what we're used to.
Rowing in the troughs of the waves, it's so hard. It just feels a lot heavier. And then once you get riding on the wave, then your boat picks up like crazy.
You feel like death and that your legs don't work anymore and they're just jelly that's flopping right underneath you.
Everything is very difficult, actually. I'm absolutely not experienced, but I still find it very exciting, and I wanted to continue playing this kind of races.
C'est totalement moins prévisible. Les gens qui regardent, ils s'attendent à voir des boîtes, à des choses qui se passent.
C'est vraiment très très spécial comme effort.
Sprint back, and try to stretch your legs to get back in the stand and hit the buzzer. So it's very, very new to me and exciting.
I think it's just a lot more fun in a sense that you're on a beach and having music.
Okay, right. So we've got to finish up here, and let's head out off this section. Take you back now into the PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to share with you today. So let's get that up. Brilliant. So beach sprint racing and training. But before I head in, I just want to really explain to you some of the differences between the sport that you're probably working with the most, which is lane racing or classic rowing, and then coastal rowing. And what we've got here is I've got a parallel on this slide between track cycling and rowing. So if you between cycling and rowing, and if you looked at lane racing, I see there's a lot of parallels between track cycling. The field of play is incredibly controlled, single speed, attempting to get real uniform skill of the 210 strokes or whatever that we're taking over that course. And of course, it's really critical that the equipment is ultra light in that space. So, you know, real parallels between both sides of track cycling and lane racing in rowing. But then if we start to look at coastal rowing, what we see here is the field of play is highly variable. It's changing all the time and unpredictable. And that's the same with mountain biking. If you look at mountain biking as a discipline, that it's really variable, and from race to race, the course is potentially over different types of terrain, and we get that in coastal rowing. So what you have is crews adapt to the field of play, rather than the field of play being really controlled. There's lots of variable speeds going on, and I think if you look at a mountain bike, you've got lots and lots of different gears. Now, of course, in rowing, we don't have that options of lots and lots of different gears, but the rowers themselves will change those gearings by how they're rating and by their length of stroke. So, you know, the rower themselves is actually providing that variable speed that we get through all the gears in mountain biking, multi-skilled in all the transitions, etc., that we have to do in coastal rowing and adapting to that environment. And the equipment is more robust than it is in track cycling or lane racing. So inside mountain biking, you've got a number of different disciplines. And in coastal rowing, we've got two primary emerging ones. Formats. So in mountain biking, you've got a cross-country format and a downhill format. Thought they paralleled really nicely with our endurance format, which does 4 to 6 kilometers, and beach sprint, which is perhaps a little bit more like their downhill in my simple term. So that's lane racing's wilder cousin in a snapshot explanation before we start to dive in to what we're going to cover today. So what are we going to cover? I'm going to give you an overview of the phases of beach sprint. And as it's such a new area for coaches to be able to be delivering in, I hope this is going to be really helpful for you. Also going to take a deeper dive into the technical and physical elements of each of those phases. And then at the end, I want to give you a bit of a checklist of basic skills that you want to make sure that your athletes have before they come to race at an international event. So overview. So let's dive into here, the coaches' phases in beach sprint. So if we look at this diagram in front of you, you can see my cursor flicking around here. So what you've got is you've got beach here, and then we've got water here. Okay, we know that we're racing out 250 meters out around 3 buoys and coming back. The finish line is on the sand, and there's a little bit of running to do. So really, you've got the boat entry part. And that's the running across the line, getting into the boat and taking the first stroke. And that all can be trained together in one unique and one distinct section. Then really after that, what you've got is you've got the slalom row. So that's the row out to the big turning point up at the top. Here it's a 180-degree turn. It's pretty high energy, and there's quite a lot of skill in getting that round. I've seen a lot of variable techniques around there. And then you've got the return row as you come down. Interestingly enough, it's a little bit quicker than the out section. And of course, that'll be because you've got the energy coming in of the waves as you come into the beach. And then the final bit is the arrival, the boat exit, and the run up the beach. So if you want to break those down even further, you can. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take each one of those in detail. But before we do that, let's head into some of the physical elements and some of the stats around what we have. So if we look at the race times at the 2019 World Rowing Beach Sprint Finals that was held in Shenzhen, you can see a real range of times across the 4 disciplines that are currently run at a global level. You've got anything from a 3:10 we picked up through to a 2:20. So a nice solid range, but still a significant amount of work in that range. If we look at the metabolism, and in 2,000 meter rowing, we're pretty confident really, depending on whether it's an 8 or a single, as to the contribution of the aerobic and anaerobic contributions to the energy output of the race. We're in new territory here with beach sprint, and I hope Thomas in the sister presentation that goes with this is going to dive in a little bit deeper into what he suspects that the metabolism is of the beach sprint. So we've got no studies, and this is the best guess that we've got so far at this stage in the game. So let's look at the breakdown of the race in terms of time. So if we take a solo distance here, so maybe a 2-minute 50, and we look at how the time breaks down for that 2 minutes 50, you can see we've got approximately 6 seconds on the run. The row out is 42%. The turn coming in at 5%, which is just under 10 seconds. The row back, which is about 41%, and do about 1 minute 10, and then the final element of the run up the beach being 10 seconds, so approximately 60%. Now, of course, parts of that will vary depending upon the conditions, the wind, the nature of the waves, how far the water's edge is from the start line. So again, real flexibility needed in your athletes in being able to modify their time durations to suit the race venue. So let's look at a little bit more. There's a little bit more to it than just training for one race. Okay, and I think some of that is due to the timetabling and the way the event presentation is delivered in beach sprint. And I really take your time, guys, to understand the thoughts behind where we got to with this event. But really the outcome, as far as you as coaches are concerned, is to explore how, in the case of a day, an athlete may be racing more than once. Okay, so if we look at the timetable here from Shenzhen, look at the women's solo time trial in the morning of the Friday, a 49-hour recovery to one of the elimination rounds here, which was on the morning of Sunday, upon which then the final 8 crews were then put into the final 8 set of races. So that is the quarterfinals, the semi-finals, and the 2 finals, the final A and B. And you'll see here the recovery once you get into that final 8 from quarterfinal to semi-final can be as little as 11 minutes. And from the semi-final to the final A, if you're going to be final 8, smaller if you ended up in final B, could be 16 minutes. So again, when you're training from a physical perspective, make sure you train for that recovery. Or the fitness to be able to cope with that amount of races. Now, be mindful, if you're doubling up, it's going to be even more than what we already have ahead of us. Okay, so let's take the deep dive. Let's take the deep dive into this. I'm just going to move myself a little bit back up to the corner here. Okay. So let's look at the start and the boat entry, and I love this picture. It's absolutely amazing. It's a same side entry by Vietnamese men's Coxed 4, and you can see the boat handler here up in the bows. It was quite a steep beach at this particular point on the tide, and the boat handler was helping the bowman in because it was a big step up for him to get in. Okay, so if we look at that phase, the phase A, what's the aim? It's a fast and clean start. And I think one of the key bits that I can stress again and again through this is that being clean and not making mistakes is probably the single most important part of all of the transitions. Okay, so technical skill, we're looking at sand running, pivot entry, close timing of operations between the boat handlers and the rower themselves, and a really accurate first stroke. Physically, we talk about speed, balance, and coordination you need to train, or you need to be looking for those skills in your athletes. So the running in the sands, about 10 to 50 meters. The balance needed to be fast and simple, and getting to the boat is massive, huge. Not just being fast on the one-off when you get it right, but being fast every time, from the time trial to the elimination races to the final 8 races. So accurate placement of the feet into the feet straps, the bottom onto the seat, and hands onto the skull. Those 3 points become massively important. And of course, clean first stroke, especially if you're on a deep beach. So let's look. I've taken here some pictures from a bit of video taken from Shenzhen. Really great boat handlers operating in here, and there's some really extra stuff you can learn from these pictures that I'm not going to have time to share with you. But if you look here, the national team member from Greece, who was participating in the women's solo, you can see here she places her pivot leg, so it's a leg she's putting her weight on and she's pivoting round. She places that in the perfect placement next to the boat. She swings her outside leg around. She turns, she steps into the boat backwards and places herself, feet in the bottom of the boat, and her bottom on her seat. So she's got her first 2 points of contact nailed. The second point of contact is the grasp, and you could see she's got her hands up and clear, ready to receive those oar handles from the boat handlers from her. And then she's away. Good grasp will mean you've got a locked in solid square set of oars where you hit that first wave. It is worth looking at picture C. So you can see here, picture C, there is a wave coming through the boat at this point. So it's definitely worth having a quick look at that. Okay, so what I want to do now is actually show you the entries of the 2 finalists in Shenzhen. And this is going to be pretty tricky for me to lock this out because it's a very, very long file. But bear with me, it's on YouTube, so you guys can go in and have a little look at this again and again. But it's here for us to look at.
As we hear the umpire call attention. And they're off. The last race here of the
so you can see them coming down, both of them slightly quicker from the Chinese athlete on her sprint. But really classic, good quality entries from both athletes. Great grasp. And then they're both away.
And she's got power through the water, so this is going to be a close one because Robin Hartwick's slightly slower off.
So you could see that was pretty quick. And I do suggest that you go and have a deeper look at that in your own time. But you could see how they had the pivot leg, the accuracy of that pivot leg, and then their 180 degree where they're turning their bodies to face backwards. Of course, that's quite a brain thing, because remember, you can see the course in front of you. You have to turn, you then have to steer that course with a mirror flip in your head. So that spatial awareness becomes critically important. Let's have a look at the quad entry. Now, the great thing about the quad is usually the coxswain is the runner in the quad, and that allows time for the crews to enter the boat after the starter has started and be ready by the time the runner has hit the boat. So you can see on the near side, we've got a crew from Hong Kong, on the far side, the mixed crew from France. Okay, so in this video, I just need to tee this one up to 30 seconds. Great, let's go for that. You can see the crew's getting in. They've got a little bit of time to do that, get themselves in ready. Boat handlers are pretty much holding the boat straight, so the first few strokes don't have to do any steering. Coxswain's working pretty hard to make sure that that rudder is set down and they're off. Okay, we're going to come back to this video a little bit later. But let's head just into in a little bit more detail in that first phase, phase A. Let's look at the surf zone. Let's look at the anatomy of that. So what you have is the deep green part of the water where the boat is operating really well in that. I mean, the boat itself, you know, the shape of the boat is designed to operate really well in deep green water. And then we've got the break zones, the area where the wave is breaking, and primarily on the swimming beaches that we're operating on, we've got 2 types of waves, a spilling wave and a dumping wave. Dumping waves tending to happen more on steeper beaches, and they're more advanced in many ways. So if you're teaching your beginners, make sure you head to a spilling wave beach with nice, gentle sloping bottom as it goes out towards the deeper part. And the bit after the wave is break tends to be called the soup. And in some cases, that's really aerated water. So it feels really different underneath the boat. It takes a little bit more skill to work through. So when you're in this safe zone, really important area for concentration. Never have your athletes gossiping and messing around in this zone. This is a zone for full concentration, no chatting. You can do the chatting on the beach, or you can do your chatting in the deeper water. But when you're in the break zone, always have your bows or your stern facing the waves, and make sure you're watching out for the one big wave that comes every 100, which is always going to be bigger than the other 99 that have come through in the last 5 or 6 minutes. So when we look specifically at that first stroke and the first wave, clean and quick through that wave. Technically, the technical skill is stroke accuracy, wave awareness. When we're looking at the physical side, the power to accelerate the boat. So it's a standing start, but with a lot more variables set around you. And what we're looking for, the stages are correct hand placement on the blade, accurate square first stroke, clean passage through that wave break. Keep the bows low to avoid the wave crashing down, because what we find is in some of these very short waves, there is a tendency for as the boat comes down over the top of the wave, the seat is knocked off. And of course, which at the end of the day is pretty much going to be race over in this short sprint format that we have. going to remind you, absolutely critical, and I've mentioned it a little bit before, when you're training, ideally train on a gentle sloping beach where the water's edge, quite often the wave break will be in the second or third stroke away from the entry zone, so maybe 15 meters away. When you've got a steeper beach, you'll find that the athlete's first stroke is in that wave break. So it's a much more complex or much more pressured start that you'll find on a steeper beach than you do on a gentle beach. So if you only train on a gentle beach and you're racing on a steep beach, you're going to find you're going to have a suddenly upskill as you go to the steeper beach. If you're always training on a steeper beach, likelihood that you won't be able to, when the weather gets big, you will have less opportunities to train. So some real trade-offs between the two. But my message to you is train on the beach. You ideally train on the same type of beach that you're planning to race on. Okay, so let's talk about phase B, the slalom out. Okay, aim is to row the shortest line in the fastest time. So we're talking about a basic rowing skill here. Boat agility. And what I mean by the word boat agility, I mean the skill of putting your boat in exactly the place you want to be with the minimum of energy. Okay, and then steering. The steering accuracy is really important. I think it's about little and often rather than oversteering and weaving from side to side. So physically, we're talking about a balance of aerobic and anaerobic in that space. And I hope we get a little bit more information from Thomas, as I said earlier. So boat speed, 250 meters. The rate is pretty high. We're seeing athletes coming in at 38 to 40 strokes per minute. So, you know, really high rate. Accurate boat placement, so knowing where the marks are, efficient steering, small, well-timed steering strokes that don't affect the boat speed. So let's look at some videos and let's look a little bit at this whereabouts are you going to put the two slalom boys as you come in. And I think I've got two nice stills here. You've got two options. One is to make sure that your blades are clear of the slalom boys, or to get that the slalom boy, the cigar boy, to drop down and drop back up as it goes under the rigger. You see a great picture from the Dutch mixed crew doing a great job here. The one you want to avoid is the sort of somewhere in between the two, where it could break your oar, again, race over, or if the best thing could happen was maybe all you catch is a crab, which I think is what happened to the Chinese sculler here. Okay, so let's see whether or not I've got a really nice video I want to share with you on this case. And again, this video is available on YouTube. Oh, actually, yeah, it is available on YouTube, but I've managed to get a copy here. So what I'll be able to do is to tee that up. So, oh, hang on, just hold on there. Let me just go back. Sorry about being a little bit fun here. So it's 1:10 I'm looking for, and I need to get the timer up. Yes, here we go. We've got a success. So make sure we get to 1:10. Okay, you can see the Chinese mixed double. The bow person, she's done such a great job at getting that slalom boy straight down underneath that rigger. She looks around twice to line it up. It's honestly, it's within an inch of perfection. They get straight over the buoy, and the way they're able to do it, they're almost not needing to steer. Okay, you can see another picture of them as they're coming down straight under the riggers. And I think we get a top picture in a minute. Again, just shows you how perfect her run into that mark was. So really great example, and one that I would definitely, as many athletes would aspire to be able to deliver. Okay, so let's look at the 180 turn. Okay, so again, the aim here is to go through the 180 turn with maximum speed efficiency and minimum energy. So, and really what you're looking at here from a technical point of view is you're looking at what I'm calling, is this a shaft break or a shaft stop? So you're using the shaft of your oar and you're trying to get that close to the stern, because the turning moment is primarily around the fin on these boats. And then of course your turning stroke, or your blade that's doing the turning, needs to be close to the bows to get a really good angle. And of course, as you come out of the turn, you're straight up back to full speed, so you need that racing start. So physically, predominantly, it's anaerobic metabolism. And I think there's a really interesting thing around the asymmetry of strength across the boat here. Okay, so stages, accurate boat placement as you come into the turn, know where the buoy is, the slingshot, so using the boat speed and the shaft brake to turn the boat through the first 45 to 90 degrees. The turn strokes, so the strokes that are really pulling those bows round, and the strength and technique, because I do believe there is a significant amount of technique to get that bow-ended stroke round. It's about 6 to 8 strokes. And then the exit. How do you exit at the right point and get back onto the racing line? And then the acceleration of the boat speed up to speed. And quite often at that point, you're doing small steering strokes to get yourself into the perfect line. So again, I've taken some stills from a bit of video. It's a lovely picture here from the French solo athlete from the World Beach Sprint Finals in Shenzhen. It's a great arrival in picture A here. He starts to bury his shaft, and he's using the slingshot effect of the power of the boat around here. And you can see he's shafting it up the oars. He's dropping his wrist to do that process rather than raising his wrist. And then he's using his slide to get his turning strokes in. Okay, we can see here, by the time we're on the third straight, we're nearly at 90 degrees. You see a huge amount of power wash off here, the power to create that. And then here's a picture of him now starting to his acceleration phase back in. So this athlete took 6 strokes. I think it's a great example. I do think there's some areas of improvement. I'd like to see a reverse square at that point. I think he would have a much, the tilt on his boat would be better at that point, but I'll share a little bit more about that in a minute. So let's look at this video here, and you can see here, this is this athlete from Great Britain. He's been able to get that reverse square in. Would like to see this athlete use more shafting, and so have greater control, so he goes on to reverse square a little bit quick. But let's have a little look at this. Also, do look at the tilt of his boat in the slingshot, because I think that's very excellent. So let me get this. So we want to come in at 28 seconds. Okay, so you can see both athletes making their way high rate out to the last turn buoy. You can see coming in, slingshot in. Unfortunately, his blade does come out of the water, but great power on that outside and straight in. Just such a great example. See here the athlete from Ireland not doing the reverse square, and you can see how it tilts the boat away. Doesn't make it allow him to put as much power into that turning point. So I've got some stills here about that same bit of that tilt of the boat. It's an example from the Great Britain solo, really nicely tilted into the turn. The blade is square, is controlled under the water. The shaft is completely buried. The twist of the hand is able to control the amount of braking that's taking place. And then, of course, this blade here is rowing on. Not working as well in this boat over here, where they're using the bottom half of the reverse squared blade to try and cause that slingshot, which they just won't get the energy out of that. Okay, so let's have a little look at a crew boat here. So let's look at the fours. And I love this picture here. So you've got the quads coming in, and you can see how stern 3 are using the slingshot. Remember, the turning momentum is primarily around the back end here of the boat. So these have got the best amount of force. Stroke has the most positive area they can put the force into. And of course, bow has the most positive turning moment with their oar on the outside. So you can see bow isn't bothering to use their shaft and the slingshot, but what they are trying to do is to get that catch as close to the bow, and you can see that angle of that stroke there. And you can see 3 and 2 are joining in with the turn strokes, but interesting enough, stroke is not. So stroke is primarily only concerned with holding that stern up. to bring them round. And of course, the coxswain is the rudder is hard over, and where possible in certain boats, the rudder the fin has been pulled up to increase the turning momentum. So let's see if we can get a shot of this, a look at this within the fours event. And here's a top shot of that. So we have the Chinese down in the bottom here and the Spanish up at the top. It's interesting enough, the Chinese are the fastest crew into the turn, but I think the Spanish turn actually made up about a third of a length with the quality of their turn. So we want to get into about 3:20 at this point. Okay, I'll give you a bit more of the race to watch. So you can see both crews coming, really super technique from both of them. Really nice, high quality. The judgment as they come in, turn starts to happen, slingshot takes place. Okay, really nice slingshot. And you can see how the stern stroke in the Spanish boat, really holding that in. They start to come out probably about 20 degrees before they need to. They allow the coxswain to take that on their rudder. So great example there, and do dive back in to look at that to see who won that race. Okay, so let's take a look at the return. So now we've finished the turn, we're coming back down to the beach. This is often the view that's there. It's quite a cluttered view. So really, again, the aim to row the shortest time in the shortest line in the fastest time. Rowing skill, boat agility, and good quality steering. We're looking at rowing speed over the 250 meters. And the difference between here and going out is that you're going to get heavy water. It's going to feel heavy, especially when you're in shallow water or you're in the trough of a wave. And it's going to feel light when you've started. You've got a bubbling wave coming in from behind on the stern and you're surfing. Accurate boat placement, so you know where your marks are, and making sure the boat is directly in line with the lane flag before entering the brake zone. And that's critically important because it's really hard to steer once you're in the brake zone. You're in the brake zone, you're just trying to go straight. If you're not straight, it's going to be difficult for you. Efficient steering and surfing. Now, you really don't catch the waves. Catching the waves is because you're going flat out. It's more often luck than by design. So if you're in an opportunity where you can catch a wave, great. And then you need to manage the benefits that gives you. And if not, you're either rowing uphill or you're rowing in that trough, which is really hard to be in. Key bit, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that, is teaching your athletes how to get off risk waves. And they're waves where they're either too big for the skill of the athlete or they're too big, full stop, for the boat and the beach that we're on. And that's why we're on swimming beaches. We come to swimming beaches because that's the size of waves that work well for this format. So as we come through the anatomy of the boat, you're coming from the deep into the break and following through on the soup. Okay, the aim to arrive on the beach close to the lane flag. Wavecraft, steering at speed and reading the wave. And really the stages, the ability to read the surf, to time arrival to take advantage of the waves. That's, to me, I think that's pretty much luck. Controlling the direction of the boat so it's running straight and maintaining speed to land on the boat. Now, some really interesting safety bits I want to leave you with here is if you're traveling slower than the waves, you are not in control. You don't have directional stability of your boat. You are likely to broach unless the waves are super small. In conditions, in really big conditions, or in conditions where your athletes aren't skillful, my advice is for them to wait, come in on the troughs between two waves, and they're going to have to travel in at the same speed as those waves. So they have to row pretty fast when they commit to that trough. And then what I was saying earlier is it's essential to train your crews to know how to spot and get off risk waves. And then a final tip really from me is check out a rule around capsize in that surf zone on the return about people, boat and run priority. Priority is people, then the boat, and finally the run. So don't get caught out by that new rule as we go through. So let me just move my little talking head over to the side. And we'll go to the next slide. So here, what we're doing here is we're looking at the profile of the boat. And I think it explains, if you understand the profile of the boat, you can really understand why some of the techniques that we use and some of the skills that you'll need to train your athletes with. So if we look at a coastal boat, it's got a low volume in the bow, it's got a narrow profile, and it's wave piercing. If we look at a surf boat, high volume, spoon bow, and it lifts up over the waves. Volume that's going to take it up over the waves. It's going to keep it high. Now, that's why those surf boats are great on surf beaches and rowing in surf. And I absolutely love the sport. I've done it. It's amazing. I wish we had more surfing in Great Britain, but we don't. And so, you know, really love that. But that's why the FISA boats, so the coastal boats, race on swimming beaches. And they're actually more akin to offshore yachts. Now, offshore yachts have low volume, narrow profile, and wave piercing bows. So really interesting analogies here on those bow profiles shapes. So if we look at the stern profile, the surf boat's got a great pintail to really hold it into the wave. Got a big rudder with the oar, the sweeps oar sticking out the back, and it's great in surf. Really great, really exciting. They also have the option to bring their weight astern of the boat, which we don't have in the coastal boats. And again, what we have in the coastal boats, a flat open stern, no deep rudder, unfortunately, because we're coming up onto the beaches, and we're good, really good in green waves. So honestly, it surfs in the smallest of green waves as you get out there. Really similar to the offshore yacht. But again, the only difference is that in offshore yachts, they do have quite a deep rudder combination that comes out underneath them. So I hope you found that interesting, and hopefully that will help you really understand how these boats work in the surf. So if I look at a controlled surf, what you'll find is that your boat is running flat and the wave is here. It's just bubbling behind. That is a controlled surf, okay? Now, the minute that wave starts to come down the boat, you could see the bow starts to drop down. Once that bow starts to drop, because it's a wave piercing, low volume bow, it's going to start to dive down. And you'll find that the steering starts to take place on the bows rather than with the fin at the stern, which of course is now in probably quite aerated water in the surface. Okay, once that starts to happen, you've got a couple of options left to you. Okay, one of them is to outrow that wave. Okay, so if you can, outrow the wave and put the wave back behind your stern. Okay, the other option, okay, is to depower the boat and let the wave just run through. So the wave will then just run through the boat and you'll stay behind. Okay, so call that getting off the wave. You can see the picture we've got here at the top. The athletes here are now at the point where their bow is diving into that boat. They've pretty much, I don't think they'll be able to outrow that wave. They're committed. Looks like they're going quite slowly, actually, that the wave is overtaking them anyway. Now they need to get off it. Unfortunately, they weren't in a position to do that. So you can see here, their stern has been lifted and they're now coming sideways on. And they're going to broach very simply. Where there is a shallow sand at that point when this happens, your bows are going to hit and your stern is going to upend. So the boat will upend, the bow will hit and you will upend. And I think that is it's really important, I think, to try and avoid this situation. I think it's not a great experience and there is a risk of damage to both the athlete and to the boat. So as a coach, try and avoid that for beginners, and also teach your athletes how to recognize it and how to get off. So what is a shaft stop or a shaft break? Well, we're using it in the slingshot for the 180 turn. And here, what you're trying to do is stop the boat using the shaft of the oars as brakes. So what you do is you slightly drop your wrist and the oar will turn and start to drop into the bottom of the water. So the blade will start to drop. As it drops, your hands will come up, okay? And you lean forward with your body to take the power off the pressure on the oars, and the boat will start to slow. The wave will go through you. You'll be in the trough of the wave. You need to get rowing pretty quickly and come in on the trough before the wave behind catches up and does exactly the same as the wave you just got off. Okay, so make sure you teach that one to your crews. Boat exit. Always keep the stern facing into the waves and remove it from the water pretty quickly. So many times have I seen crews watching their athlete run to the line, cheering to them, not realizing a massive wave's coming in behind them and it's about to put the boat straight into the back of their legs and give them a horrible bruise. So keep your eyes out. The race is not over until the boat has left the water. So your aim here is to get out of the boat and one row to the finish line. Athlete, the technical skill, agility, spatial awareness, to time a perfect exit with sprint. So physically, you're looking at timing, balance, and speed. Stages, really that exit from the moving boat to stand on a sloping beach is critical. Spatial awareness, that's really interesting. So as the athlete is in the boat, so they're going to be in the boat like this. When they get out of the boat, they're going to have to turn around. So when they see where the flag is, as the arrival on the beach, it has done a mirror flip in their head as they start to run towards. And again, some athletes really struggle with that mirror flip. So make sure you train them enough to be able to modify that as they do. And again, remember, it's running uphill, it's through the sand, and if you need to, a nice snazzy dive to the buzzer in the sand. In training, make sure you have 2 flags, 2 buzzers. Don't want people's heads knocking into each other. So I've done some stills here for some video for you. Here in the solo, primarily what's happening here is you've got the bow touches down, okay? The feet are freed of the oar from the boat. The athlete swivels round on their seat. Both feet land on the ground, transfer the weight onto the feet. The final 90 degrees of twist happens as they stand up and they accelerate over to the finish line. In the quad, again, it's slightly different in the quad because you've got that option, because the rest of the athletes can maintain the boat speed, you're able to turn around. And the critical bit here is to make sure you stow your oars so you don't get caught into a crab and cause problems with the boat coming in or hitting you. Keeping your weight in the center of that boat so it doesn't cause a rock from one side or the other, which again could cause a crab and an issue. And most of the athletes are pushing off before the boat hits the sand at this point. So again, there's quite a bit of strength as they're moving from a moving boat to a solid beach where it's sloping into them. And it's critical that the guys time that to land in shallow water so there's no risk of the boat overtaking the runner. I have seen that happen. And then, of course, straight into the finish itself. And I love that picture. It's a beautiful picture. And for the athlete, I'm sure it's a lovely feeling having done just over 2.5 minutes of exercise. So I promised that I would leave you with a list of skills that I think, a checklist of skills that you as a coach should build with your athlete before you get them to race at an international level. So series of able to swim and float, so being really confident and comfortable in water. The ability to re-enter their boat in deep water, so to self-rescue if they get they capsize out on the course. Able to launch and land their own boat, so they understand how it works and the power of the waves in that section of launching and landing. Be able to row in a straight line at speed. And remember, this isn't like 2,000-meter rowing where the water's pretty flat and the boats are long. We've got much shorter boats, much more agile boats. So keeping the boat straight is important. Able to place their bows within a 1 meter accuracy. And of course, we saw the Chinese mixed double do it within, probably 1 centimeter of accuracy at full speed. Able to turn the boat through 180, able to brace a broach. So if they do get knocked into a broach, their boat is going sideways, able to brace up with their blades flat on the water and holding the stabilized action, able to get off a risk wave using the shafts, and they have just a foundation in water skills to know when not to stand with a boat between them and a wave without making sure that somebody is holding it and it's not likely to come down and give them a horrible bruise. So let's look at the some of those understandings and bits of knowledge to understand the risks on the beach that they're racing on and how to avoid them. Now that might be glass, it might be high sun, UV content, it might be jellyfish. So do they know? You as a coach, it's important that that's part of your safety briefing. Do they know how to call for help on a beach? Do they understand the marine rules? So keeping port to port and how to operate within them, especially if there's local rules about swimmers and boats. Do they understand that by entering the race that they've signed up to the rower and crew captain's obligations, and these are in the rules of racing, and they're just really good, plain, straightforward bits of basic knowledge that the rowers and crew captains need to be aware of? Do they understand the importance of the people boat race rule that's come into effect from September? Do they know that the break zone can be really unpredictable and be on guard for extra powerful waves? You know, as I said before, the break zone is not a place for discussion and larking around. That's for concentration. And if you want to have your discussions, get your discussions out on the beach after you've brought the boat off. And then probably the thing that I think is most important is, do they know their personal limits and when to stop going out onto the water and just enjoying watching the sea at its best? So that's really a checklist, and I hope you find that useful. I'm going to leave you with a quote here. As a coach, it's important that you train your athletes to have the skills and the knowledge to be safe, have fun, and go fast on the sea. So if you want to learn more, there is World Rowing have developed in the last few months a coastal race module. There are coach educators being educated as I speak. So there's opportunities for people to get on and receive some of the coastal race module content. It's designed for experienced coaches, so coaches that know the basics of rowing, be able to adapt your knowledge into the coastal race setup. And then there's a great resource, World Rowing Coastal Booklet, that's available as a PDF on worldrowing.com. Head into the coaching section and you'll be able to hunt it down. So thank you ever so much. It's the end of my talk. And if you want to ask any questions of Thomas and I, we'll be back on the Q&A, timetabled scheduled Q&A, and please come and ask us lots of questions. Take care. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Dear all, my name is Thomas Losnegård, and I'm an associate professor at Norwegian School of Sport Science. And I'm also head of endurance department at the Norwegian Olympic Training Center. So today I will talk about cross-country skiing and sprint skiing, and more specifically, I will talk about lessons and comparison with cross-country skiing, Prologue Ski with quarterfinal, semi-final, and final, with a short period of time. How to maintain metabolic levels. But first of all, let's just start with this endurance speed strength relationship. Because similar to rowing, cross-country skiing demands a very high endurance capacity, but at the same time you need to have this high level of strength. So as we can see here, skiing and rowing is rather similar. Skiers have shown a unique ability to build up and sustain a relatively large and strong muscle mass, while at the same time having an outstanding endurance capacity. And we need to target these specific demands by sport-specific stimuli. And we also need to puzzle together these components in the best possible way. So this is very similar for both sports, and I'll also talk a little bit about that later in my presentation. But just have a quick overview of the outline of today. I will start my presentation with showing you the energy demands of sprint skiing. What's the similarities? What's the differences to rowing? I will then try to show you some of the training. What does the best skiers do when it comes to training? I will then go more into details about the race preparation. What do the skiers do the coming days, and maybe also on the same day as the competition, and go more into details about the race day how do they prepare for the sprint events, what kind of warm-up strategies, what they do they do between the heats, and so on. Cross-country skiing is divided into some kind of disciplines. We have this, what we call the distance events, which is from 10 kilometers to 30 kilometers for the women, and 15 kilometers to 50 kilometers for the men for the individual races. We also have this relays, 5 kilometers for women and 10 kilometers for men. So this is called the distance events in cross-country skiing. In addition, we have this, what we call sprint events. We have this individual sprint events, which contains a qualification round, quarterfinal, semifinal, and a final. And we have this relays, this team sprint relays, which means that 2 skiers on the same team do some kind of sprint events. One skiers go 1 lap, and the other skiers complete the next lap, and so on. So these are the 2 sprint events that we have in cross-country skiing. And the sprint skiing events was originally first announced in World Championship back in 2001 and in the Olympics in 2002. So the sprint events in cross-country skiing is nearly 20 years old. So we have conducted some experience according to training and competition strategies in sprint skiing that we'll talk a little bit about today. But just to get you some kind of overview, what is cross-country skiing? Because if we compare skiing and rowing, we need to somehow try to outline what is the demands of cross-country skiing. I'll just briefly start with this track profile here in the most famous skiing tracks in Holmenkollen. You can see the track profile is here, and on the bottom here you see actually the duration of the different segments during a competition. And you see, in contrast to most other endurance sport, the segment duration here is typically between 10 to 14 seconds. So this is very different to most other endurance sport, meaning that you have some kind of shift in intensity during a competition, with some periods with extremely high intensity and some periods with rather low intensity. And if you look more detailed into the demands of cross-country skiing, the maximal oxygen uptake is the most important factor in cross-country skiing, both in sprint and distance skiing. And this has been demonstrated in several research papers over the last 6 decades from Norway and Sweden, from the classic work by Bengt Saltin to Ulf Berg, Frank Inger, Hasse Holmberg, and so on, and also recently in our group. And this is an overview of the requirements of distant cross-country skiing, the reported VO2 max from 1960 to today. And as you can see, a VO2 max of about 6.2 liter or 85 milliliter per kilo per minute is a requirement for the best elite skiers. Similar in female skiers, the best female skiers have a VO2 max of above 70. And this study by Sandbach also showed that if you compare world-class skiers and national level skiers, you see that what discriminates these athletes is, among several factors, is the VO2 max. So VO2 max is clearly important. And also, if you compare these values in male skiers to what has been found in rowing, we see that a VO2 max here in rowing of about 6.4, 6.5 is mandatory to be on the highest level in rowing. So in many ways, we see that there's some similarities according to what is the most important factors in those 2 sports. And here the VO2 max is clearly one aspect that is important in both sports. But let's now have a more detailed look into the demands of sprint skiing. In sprint skiing, we have a typical sprint race duration of about 3 minutes. And here the oxygen demand is well above the VO2 max because it's a rather short distance. And just an overview or average values, we see that the aerobic turnover is about 75%, while the anaerobic turnover is 1/4. And if you look at more specifically exercise intensity during sprint skiing, what I showed in the introduction is that you have these segments with very high intensity because of you have periods with downhills where you can recover, meaning that during a sprint event you can actually have a VO2 demand of 120 to 160 and maybe also even more during part of the segments. And we have also seen that if you measure the oxygen uptake during a sprint, we see that athletes reach about 95%. So this indicates that the anaerobic capacity is of course important, but also the aerobic maximum aerobic power. If you look more into general data on anaerobic and aerobic energy system contribution during selected events, we see that these values that I reported from cross-country skiing is rather similar to what we found in other sports. So with a duration of, let's say, 3 minutes, here in the review paper by Paul Gaskin, about 75% aerobic, 25% anaerobic. This illustration here shows let's say, the relation between the time and the exercise intensity in different events. So here you have the 3-minute cross-country skiing sprint. Here you have a 6-minute, which could be rowing, a 2,000-meter rowing. And here we have a slightly longer distance, for instance, 10,000-meter speed skating. And then you have typically a 10,000-meter running. The important here is that if you look at the oxygen uptake here, you could have a rather similar oxygen uptake if you compete a 3-minute or a 30-kilometer race. But the important thing here is that this accumulated oxygen deficit, as you have in sprint skiing here, you should actually do that 4 times during a short period, and that the exercise intensity here is around 120% of the VO2 max. But if you go to rowing, we see that the exercise intensity, of course, is a little bit lower because of the duration. And you have, in principle, the same anaerobic capacity over 6 minutes as in 3 minutes. But as you can see here, if you have a longer duration, you need to some kind of spread this anaerobic capacity over a longer duration. But you still have the same anaerobic capacity, but the exercise intensity needs to be a little bit lower. And so we can continue with the speed skating and also running. So this is just an illustration of the aerobic and anaerobic system contribution during different events. Now, let's have a more detailed look about the differences between specialized sprint skiers. Because I show in the introduction that VO2 max is clearly one important factor for skiers. And this study here actually illustrates the importance of the VO2 max in specialized sprint skiers. So here is a study from Sandbakk in Trondheim, and you can see the world-class skiers here compared to the national level class. And what we found here is that among some variables, the VO to peak is one of the factors that's actually different between the different kind of levels. So if you look at, for instance, body height and body mass index, there's no clear differences, but the VO to max is clearly one factor that's different. But if you look at strength differences or speed differences, there's no clear differences between the world-class skiers and the national level skiers. So among sprint skiers, VO to max again is the most important factor. This is also just an illustration of the relation between the prologue position in skiing compared to the final position. And as you can see here, there's a very good relationship between the prologue position and the final position. And the reason for this good relationship could also be related to the fact that if you do a good prologue, you have possibly better chances to go through the quarterfinal and semifinal because of the ranking. So if you win the prologue, you can choose the heat that is best for you, and you also have the longest recovery between it. So that this is also an important aspect. You need to sustain the different finals, but you also need to be fast in the prologue to have a good position later in the event. So far, before I go into more details about the training for skiers, just this that I have told you so far, does it have any implications for rowing? Well, we've seen that VO to max is clearly important in skiing, but we also see that VO to max actually discriminates different level of sprint skiers, even though it's a 3 minutes competition. We've seen that strength is not necessarily different between sprint skiers. We know that sprint skiers need to be strong, but it's not necessarily that stronger is better. But as I will come back to, in addition to having a high VO to max, the ability to recover between the heats is extremely important. So therefore, I will now go into more details about the training before competition, the warm-up, and also the re-warm-up between quarters, semi, and finals. Nutrition strategy, I will not talk very much about that, but that's an important aspect. And the tactics. But first of all, let's go through some training data. This is an illustration of how cross-country skiers in general train, because of course the endurance is the most important aspect here, and in the endurance they typically have different activity or exercise modes. So they have possibility to ski on snow, and you have the possibility to ski during dry line training, during roller skiing, and most skiers also use running as a training form. Some skiers also use cycling, and very few actually athletes use other forms such as paddling or other activity forms. But most important is the running and the skiing activities. And the endurance training in Norway, we typically divide into 5 intensity zones, where you have 2 low intensity and 3 high intensity zones. So in this paper here by Professor Sandbakk and Professor Holmberg, you can see a rough overview of what the skiers typically do during a year. Normal training volume is somehow between 800 to 950, and most of this training is, of course, endurance training. And the distribution of the exercise intensity is shown here. They typically have like 90% or 5, meaning that 90% of the training is on low intensity and 5% is in moderate and 5% is in high intensity. And this is also illustrated here from a more historical perspective. This is the training by some champions in cross-country skiing for the women and for the men from the 1980s to today. And you see that typically around 90% is actually on very low intensity. 5 is in moderate and 5 is in high intensity. And in frequency of workouts, this is about 80-20, meaning that within 10 sessions, 8 of those are at low and 2 of those are in high intensity, which is actually a very normal distribution in Norway. And again, if you compare different levels of skiers, this is world-class skiers, you see that typically the world-class skiers, better skiers, have a higher volume of the low-intensity part, while very similar to the other training forms. However, it's important to notice this is not necessarily the reason why they're better. This is just a characteristic of better skiers. And if you look at specialized sprint skiers compared to distance skiers, you see that sprint skiers and distance skiers actually are training very similar. In terms of low intensity training, you can see sprint male skiers have very similar to the distance skiers. Also in terms of moderate and high intensity. But what is somehow a difference here is that sprint skiers train a little bit more strength and speed. So I think what we have learned from the last 20 years in sprint skiing is that the training is not necessarily very different. It's some parts of the training which is different, but again, the development of the maximal oxygen uptake and the ability to recover between hits, the endurance ability, is still so very important in sprint skiing that it's not very different to what we have seen in distance skiers. This brief overview here of the physiology of world-class sprint skiers by Sandbach. Again, you can see the training hours here in the low, moderate, and high intensity, the speed and strength training. The differences between level of skiers here, again, is that world-class skiers, they train more. They don't necessarily do very fixed training forms, they just do more of it. In terms of periodization, cross-country skiers follows a very traditional, let's say, Matière model with reducing the volume near the season. So here you have the different months, and a typical season in cross-country skiing starts in November and goes through March. And you see that during the summer months, you have a high volume. While you're nearing the competition, the volume is reduced, while the amount of high intensity training is somehow increased. A very traditional model, and it's very traditional also in Norway, independent of endurance sports. Here you see the periodization in terms of specific and non-specific exercise modes. The specific exercise mode is, of course, skiing on snow, but also roller skiing, while the non-specific is typically running, and some also do some cycling. You see in the general preparation phase, you have typically a 50-50, 50% specific, 50% non-specific, while when you are entering the season, they increase the specific training and reduce the non-specific training. Okay, so now we have seen what skiers do and the differences between level of skiers. We have seen what the differences between sprint and distance skiers. Now let's more focus on the race. And let's first start about race preparation. And what is interesting now in the literature is there has been several papers over the last years dealing with this topic. Should you actually do some kind of exercise in the morning before if you compete on the evening? So I will briefly just show you some studies that we have done into this topic and also show what skiers actually do. So the first study that I'm going to show you is a study where we investigated the effect of resistant, let's say, training or priming in the morning and the effect on the afternoon sprint skiing performance. So this table here, you should not focus very much on that, but in general, the skiers come to testing 2 times. One time they did nothing in the morning, and we had some performance test in the afternoon. While the second day, in a randomized order, they did some strength exercises, had a break, and then we tested them again in the afternoon. So the main aspect here is to actually see what happens if you train some kind of strength exercise in the morning. Does it help you in the afternoon? We also asked them about some self-reported day shape. So here we can see what they rated. You see there's clearly not much differences between the non-exercise day and the resistant day. So they didn't actually rate that they were feeling any better after having this resistant compared to the no exercise day. Here is 3 figures. This is jump height, counter movement jump. This is a time to exhaustion during treadmill roller skiing, and this is a short sprint test during 30 minutes double poling. And you see the no X condition and the resistant condition. So in the no X, they did no exercise in the morning, while during the resistant, they have some resistant exercise in the morning. According to jump height, we see there's no clear effect of having this resistant exercise in the morning. We see there's a large variation to time to exhaustion, but in general, there's no clear evidence that it helps you with this resistant training in the morning. And similar to the sprint test, it was actually no effect on the morning training. We also did a similar study in running, very similar setup. Here we have 3, let's say, strategies. No exercise, we had some running with some sprint test, and we have this again, resistant exercise. They had a break for 5.5 hours, and then we again tested some performance variables during the afternoon. Again, we also asked the subjects about their day shape, readiness prior to test. We found no clear effects on those variables. We had some submaximal tests. We measured the running economy. This is again 6 hours after the morning sessions. We see that in terms of exercise economy, there was no clear effect, no effect on the blood lactate concentration during the running, heart rate, or RP. When it comes to the maximal loads, we had some performance tests. We had a time to exhaustion, which you should focus on here. And statistically, there's no clear evidence that the running or resistant exercise actually help the athletes. So in summary, there seems to be some evidence that morning exercise may help athletes when they should compete in the afternoon, but most of those evidence is based on very short events and not endurance events. So we actually found no beneficial effect on such strategies for skiing. Then let's go into more specifically what is a sprint day and what do elite skiers do. So I start with let's say a time schedule of an elite athlete that has won several World Cup stages, and I asked him, what do you do? How does your day look like when you are competing? So this is just an overview. You can see the time here and what they do before the first competition, which is the prologue here at 11. You see these athletes actually do some morning exercise, even though it's not scientifically proven that it helps, but he's at least doing some of that before breakfast. And then they go to ski testing around an hour before they start. They typically have this kind of warm-up before the prologue with 15 to 20 minute easy, then 3 to 5 minutes trial at moderate intensity, a little progressive, and then they have some short sprints in the end of the warm-up. And this is done approximately 10 to 15 minutes before of the prologue. So the last 10 minutes they try to have no exercise but keep the body temperature. Then they perform this prologue, which is a 3-minute all out, and as we've seen before, the exercise intensity is extremely high here. And they follow this prologue with a small meal and maybe some easy ski or running like 10 minutes. And after the prologue, they are selecting heats, they are eating, maybe inspection of a new racetrack, and then they do this kind of re-warm-up, which is rather similar to their warm-up strategy, but slightly more easy. And then we have this quarterfinal. And what I think is very important here is, let's say, the recovery between the different quarterfinal, semifinal, and final. In cross-country skiing, you typically have like 45 minutes between the quarterfinal and the semifinal, and about 25 minutes from the semifinal to the final. And historically, skiers were very concerned about this kind of recovery. You should do some active recovery. You should have a cycle at the finish line where you can start immediately after you have finished your quarterfinals to start to recover and reduce your blood lactate, which many thought was very important. Today we know that this is not necessarily so important, as I will come back to. But many of the skiers do very easy exercise between heats, but good clothing is of course very important in skiing because you have the cold environment. So they do different kind of things, but in general very easy, and some of them don't do very much at all. Then you have the semi-final and you have the final, and it's also important for the skiers to plan what they should do actually after final, because in skiing normally you have also a competition the day after. So for this guy here, it's when he's finished his final, he's starting to plan actually the day after. But again, important with easy meals directly after the race. Many skiers have this kind of individual treatment of the respiratory system. Many skiers have challenged with the respiratory system, and they typically have a low intensity workout also in the night. So the point is, by showing you this, that it might sound like sprint skiing is an easy day because you just compete 4 times 3 minutes. but it's so much more than these 3 minutes, and planning what you should do before, between, and after these 3 minutes is of course very important. So let's go into warming up and warming down, because I think that's some of the most important factors in ski. According to warm-up strategies, there's no such clear benefit or evidence in cross-country skiing, but many skiers typically do what they also do in running. Here they have investigated the effect of two different warm-up strategies. They have a 10-minute warm-up and 6 times 50 meters the one day, and the next day they have 10-minute warm-up and 2 times 50 minutes plus a 200 meter at race pace. So they have same distances of both days, but the second day they have like at least 200 meters at race pace, meaning that they have a slightly longer duration with warm-up. And they found here that this, with a little bit longer warm-up, it actually improved the performance in track and field. And this strategy is also very normally seen in cross-country skiing, where you have some minutes on high intensity. So what do skiers do actually between heats? The typical heat duration in World Cup races during the last 4 seasons has been about 3 minutes, as I told you. And the recovery is about 25 to 50 minutes. And during this recovery phases, skiers do a lot of different kind of strategies with the explicit goal of maintaining performance. And the ability to repeatedly sprint these events is likely to be influenced of the recovery strategy. So in this project here, we tested the effect of an active versus a more passive recovery in sprint cross-country skiing. So what we did was that the skiers visited the laboratory 2 times. The first time they did either an active or a passive recovery. They had some 3 minutes, about 3 minutes sprints here. And then they had this active recovery where they were running at a low intensity for some minutes, and they did another sprint test. And the other day here on the passive recovery, they had the same test, but then they were, instead of having this active recovery, we had a passive recovery where the skiers were actually seated on a chair for 15 minutes. Then they were just walking a little bit, and then were performing another back. So what we found here you can see the active recovery, passive recovery, heat 1, heat 2. So we should focus now on the 800 meter time. And actually there was no big differences between this active recovery and the passive recovery. So there was an effect size here of 0.30, which is small, but we found that the active recovery induced a little higher oxygen uptake during heat 2 compared to the passive recovery. So in conclusion here, we can say that it's as long as you can keep your body temperature between heats, it's not necessarily that important to have an active recovery. But at the same time, active recovery might be the most safest choice since you have the ability to actually have a little higher oxygen uptake during the test or during the race. So this needs to be tested for the athletes and actually see what is the actual protocol that athletes need to do. I think this also is a little interesting figure because again we see this passive and the active recovery, and we see this pattern of blood lactate response. And what you see here is nothing new. It has been shown in several studies, but if you do an active recovery, you clearly see that the lactate clearance is much higher. You reduce your lactate more rapidly if you do some kind of active recovery compared if you do a passive recovery. But that's not necessarily important in terms of reducing your lactate. The most important thing is to have the ability to recover better. And we also seen that the ability to recover is something that discriminates different kind of sprint skiers. So here in this study by Øyvind Sandbakk, they did some kind of treadmill testing here with some time to exhaustion, and then they stopped here, and then they measured the blood lactate concentration during passive recovery here. And you see that the black dots, which is the best skiers, they clearly have a higher lactate reduction or clearance than the lower level of skiers. So this is probably related to the training and the ability to actually recover better from the heats. If this has something to do with, for instance, higher VO2 max or other abilities is currently not known. But according to the recovery of the anaerobic capacity, the pre-post test of 45 minutes, we have seen that you can actually gain similar oxygen deficit. So if you have a test and you have a retest 45 minutes after, you can actually recover the anaerobic capacity. But if you go down to, let's say, 25 minutes, which is actually the time differences between a semi-final and a final, you probably have difficulties to be able to recover the anaerobic capacity completely. And those skiers who actually have this ability will, of course, have have a very good opportunity to win the races. So reloading the anaerobic capacity or the maximum accumulated oxygen deficit is, of course, highly important in sprint skiing. But as I said, this kind of endurance ability is not completely understood. It has been suggested that a higher threshold means that you have higher oxidative reserves. And it could be speculated that even skiers seldom are at this kind of threshold in rowing or in skiing. This is maybe important for the ability to actually recover. And I will complete my presentation with giving you an example of this so-called threshold with data from running and skating in one elite subject. He's tested as a junior and as a senior. And this figure shows the relation between the oxygen uptake and the blood lactate concentration in running, which is the red one, and in more specific skating, marked as a blue one. And you can see as a junior athlete, he has a higher VO2 at a similar lactate level in running compared to skating. While, as we often see with training, this specific threshold during testing increases in skating, while it is similar in running for the senior in the junior example. So, in conclusion, VO2 max is clearly important, but also the ability to sustain the heats. And what is this kind of ability? What is this endurance ability to sustain heats? Is something that we don't necessarily know very much about. We have seen that strength is not necessarily different between athletes in the same race-specific events. Precondition, meaning that if you do some kind of morning exercise before competition, is very normal in many athletes, but the scientific evidence of such training is not complete. It's not fully understood, but we don't see any clear effect on that, at least on the short term. And we have also seen some kind of strategies to maintain performance between heats. Something that's clearly important is the tactics. If you have a very fast strategy or a slow strategy, that could actually influence the recovery process between heats. So that's something also to think about. Should you do passive or active protocols? In cross-country skiing, active protocols is probably the safest choice due to the low temperature, environmental temperature, but in rowing, it could be that also passive recovery protocols is maybe the best in the long run. We have seen some effective warm-up, effective warm-up strategies, but that also need to be developed for rowers in a new event, and also in terms of nutrition. Thank you very much for your attention.